Okay, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our anniversary conference. I send my best wishes to you all. I would very much prefer to be with you in person rather than speaking to you remotely, but travel has become rather difficult for me nowadays. This anniversary is rather special for us as it celebrates 50 years of supporting and promoting research in our field. That's a significant achievement and one which I think we can justly take some pride. I'm the only surviving member of the original group who formed Sempre, or SRPMME as it was originally called. And so Graham's asked me to share with you some memories of our earliest days. Our activities began in Reading University in the mid-1960s when Arnold Templey, who was the head of music education there, invited fellow researchers to come together regularly to discuss research issues. At first, these were quite informal discussions, but later they developed into more organized meetings where members presented their research formally in the customary way. I was Bentley's research student at the time, so I was recruited to these meetings from the start. Among other early members, whose names you might still encounter in a literature search, were Rosamund Shooter, Rupert Thackeray, Sam Taylor, Aubrey Hickman, and Leon Crickmore, and also some others who weren't active researchers, but had professional interests in the advancement of music education. Arnold's background was that he was a classicist, but he was a very competent pianist and organist. And after teaching in secondary schools and wartime service in the RAF, he'd been invited to establish the first training program specially designed to prepare music graduates for teaching. His views on music education were conservative. For him, music activities in the classroom should comprise a traditional pattern of class singing, music appreciation, playing percussion instruments, and teaching music literacy. Very much the model of music teaching of the 1920s and 30s that I myself experienced. He produced a page of guidance for students who were starting his courses. Again, I remember with the recommendation, no 5 songs of Schubert. Worthwhile aim in itself, but not closely in tune with the needs of the classroom. And I think it reflected his deep-rooted conservatism. But in 1968, he took a step that had some important consequences. He invited researchers working in music education from around the world to join a week-long meeting to be held at Reading. It was the first international meeting of music education researchers. Had particular significance for me personally. I was completing my thesis at the time, and the meeting enabled me to make a number of international friends and colleagues. I still have a photograph of the conference participants. Not all of the group are of interest to us here today, and I have to confess that there are a couple whose names I've forgotten in the intervening 60 years. Here we all are, gathered in rather untidy formation. Arnold standing at the center of the group, beaming at us all. I'll just pick out a couple of the more notable people. On the right-hand side of the group is Alan Britton from Indiana University. In 1953, Alan had founded the Journal of Research in Music Education. Its early issues reflected his own interest in the history of American education and music of the early settlers. But after 1965, it began to carry reports of experimental studies. Now, of course, it's our sister journal under Sage. On the other side of the group is Bob Petzold. In 1963, he was associated with Charlie Leonard and Richard Colwell at the University of Illinois in founding the Council for Research in Music Education Bulletin. Kurt Erich Eicher from West Germany, laughing heartily at the back here, deserves a special mention. Kurt spoke 5 languages fluently, and he also had an expert knowledge of Mexico and its music. He was an experienced political wheeler-dealer in the education world. His language skills rescued us from a difficulty in 1975. The ISME Research Seminar was being held in Mexico City that year, and the Mexican government had undertaken to make the full costs of the seminar, including board and lodging for participants. But once they'd all arrived in Mexico City, no such payments were forthcoming, and we were all faced with paying not only our own hotel bills, but also sharing the cost of hiring the larger hotel rooms needed for meetings. This was going to be an embarrassment for some younger participants. So Kurt Eric paid a morning call on the Minister of Education, and in his fluent Spanish, pointed out how inconvenient it might be for a minister's career if the front pages of the daily papers were to carry reports of an international incident involving a default by the minister. By the time coffee was brought, the bill had been paid. It was a real-life example of that old television program, Yes, Minister. Some of the early members of Sempre are here in the photo too. Sam Taylor, a lovely man and a personal friend. He and his wife died tragically when a rogue driver drove out in front of them on the main road. Rupert Thackeray, who made a study of children's rhythmic abilities. In the front row on the left of the photo is Rosamund Shooter. Rosamund was a charming, if slightly eccentric lady, but she'd got a very sharp mind. Her particular interest was music abilities in mono and dizygotic twins. The eager-looking boy next to Rosamund is myself, reminding me of the opening lines of the Rubaiyat. Myself, when young, did eagerly frequent doctor and saint, and heard great argument. And its more downbeat second line, but evermore came out the same door wherein I went. The seminar had one important outcome for us all. Bentley, Britain, and some others agreed to meet at the ISME conference in Dijon, which was held the following week. While there, they constituted themselves as the first ISME Music Education Research Commission, and they agreed that the Reading conference, which they'd attended the previous week, would be the first of biennial meetings, particularly providing opportunities for younger researchers to present their work. It's salutary to remember how limited were the resources available to help us in research in the 1960s and early 70s. A literature search meant scouring recent journals and then having to make interlibrary requests for photocopies. Sometimes it involved making a journey to London. Nowadays, a tap on the screen of our mobile phones will bring up a comprehensive array of recent researches with freedom to read their abstracts, if not the entire text. Pocket calculators only became available around 1975, and then they were limited to just 4 arithmetic functions, no possibility of a square root or standard deviation. I will remember in the 60s and 70s calculating anavars by hand with no more assistance than a pencil and squared paper. The earliest personal computers appeared in 1977. So the PCs that sit in all our offices and homes didn't exist. The BBC computer, sturdy little machine built cheaply as part of the government's policy to develop computer literacy, didn't appear until 1981. Scene has certainly changed. Students can now easily get the results of complex analyses by means of SPSS or one of the obliging online calculators, sometimes avoiding much understanding of the principles or processes involved. But to return to the early days of Sempre, through the latter years of the 1960s, attendance at our regular meetings in Reading had grown steadily. And by 1971, we'd reached a regular attendance of around 60. And at that point, I felt we were receiving a sufficiently reliable flow of worthwhile papers to be able to venture into publishing a journal of our own. I proposed this at the meeting in 1971 in October, and it was met with warm, though cautious enthusiasm. Now I was deputed to find what the cost implications might be and try to find a suitable printer. At the following meeting in 1972, I was able to report that I'd found a printer with experience in producing government documents who'd offered to produce a journal for us at a very fair price. Of course, a regular publication would need the provenance of an academic body to own it. And so I proposed that we should establish ourselves as the Society for Research in Psychology of Music and Music Education, and that our new journal should be called Psychology of Music. This was approved by all present, with just one exception. Bentley wanted the journal to be confined to music education issues, and he objected to the word psychology in the titles of both the society or the journal. The vote went against him, but sadly, the decision always remained a disappointment with him. I also had to point out that to publish a journal would need money, quite a lot of it, and immediately. Someone in the meeting suggested that everyone who voted for the proposal might like to put their money where their mouth was and make a donation. I was amazed and delighted to find people pressing money on me, many £20 notes, a couple of 50s, quite a large sum in 1972, and I ended the day with enough funds to meet the cost of the first issue. I was also nominated to act as the journal's first editor. I'd originally hoped for our first issue to be distributed in 1972, but progress was delayed by issues outside my control, and we finally published in January 1973. But a journal needs readers who will pay for it, and we needed to find them quickly if there was any hope of a second issue. The Journal of Research in Music Education generously donated a couple of free full-page advertisements. We bought advertising space in other publications and music magazines, and I quite unashamedly touted all my contacts in the music profession. We established a circulation to libraries and universities around the world much more quickly than I'd expected. But we were still essentially a cottage industry. Subscriber records were kept by my 16-year-old daughter in exchange for an uplift in pocket money. There could be unexpected and bizarre problems. For example, a mail sorter mistook the tiny, if undelivered, please return to sender notice that appeared on the back of the envelopes for the much larger delivery address label, which was on the front. As a consequence, 52 copies that had been posted to overseas subscribers arrived back on my own desk the following morning. But looking back through early issues, it's surprising how quickly music became recognized as a serious publication. I began to receive papers from respected research centers. In our third year, I was very happy to receive a paper by Peter Scheid and John Eccles from the Max Planck Institute. It reported one of the earliest attempts to map the brain in respect of music behaviors, a sphere that's become of considerable importance for music psychology. We also published the first papers of some budding young writers who've subsequently become familiar names. In 1978, we published John Svoboda's first paper, and the following year carried the first paper of an up-and-coming young man called Graham Welch. Had something to do with children's voices, I remember. These first uncertain efforts were the roots from which our present society and journal have grown. The journal has truly prospered and has become an important contributor to the flow of professional literature on music and the mind. Now I have 6 issues a year, carrying around 25 papers, a total of around 150 articles annually, more than any other comparable journal. Other journals have appeared along the way, and they've become important resources, but the unique quality of psychomusic is that we've always taken an eclectic position and published papers dealing with a wide range of topics. It's always been a truly multidisciplinary journal. The success of the journal, and indeed of Sempre itself, owes much to the wisdom and business acumen of those who followed me, and especially our chairman and secretary, my longtime friends and colleagues, Graham Welch and Adam Ockleford. I look back with pleasure on my long association with Sempre. At the age of 93, I'm delighted to have had a paper accepted for the next issue of Type of Music. I send good wishes to you all. Enjoy our 50th anniversary conference.